Giving my opinion on the Fujifilm X100 VI. I did have the F version of this camera. I liked it, used it for a while, eventually sold it to get into something a little bit more practical. Definitely quite a few changes compared to that model and the previous model, which is the V as people call it, but the 5. This genre of camera has had a lot of hype, especially lately around it. And obviously when it first came out, the original X100 had a lot of interest, a lot of people wanting to get it. So at least lately it's been challenging to find the version 5. Hopefully this new release will alleviate that issue. We'll see. They did change the manufacturing location of this camera from Japan to China. It's possible that it'll be easier to find. They increased the price on this camera. I don't know what you want to call it, inflation or just added technology, considering it has IBIS in the camera now. $1,600 MSRP in the United States. Fujifilm provided a very nice chart to see the differences between the previous model and this new one. 40.2 megapixel sensor compared to the 26.1. They're both still the X-Trans format of sensor. A big difference in video, but consider that there are crop factors involved with this video mode. And one note that I did see in a video release from Gordon at the Camera Labs, he mentioned he was able to record 4K with just basically exhausting the battery. So that's a very nice sign for the ability to record longer clips with this new version of the camera. It's obviously nice to have video in there, but I think it's more of a photo camera. Another big addition to this new camera compared to the previous one and all the other existing X100 cameras is the 5-axis in-body stabilization. So that's a very nice addition, especially for video, but photos as well. You'll get a nice benefit there in some photography situations. They did improve the autofocus, animals, trains, planes, whatever. It's a little odd to have those in the camera considering the lens focal length does have teleconverters, which I'll get to. I mean, it's nice to have. There's no reason not to put those modes in the camera when they have it available. High-speed shooting, this is not a camera I would see being used for high-speed shooting, again, considering the focal length. But you can obviously do it. It's nice to have. They did increase the weight, as you can see, 478 grams compared to 521. If you want to look at the specifications, obviously, I'll put a link in the description for their websites. A lot of detailed information. It's nice that they put really detailed information for video modes. So you've got your formats, you have your bit rates, you've got your color depth. Very nice chart here to look at. And you can see that the crop factors for video, 6.2K 16:9 has a 1.23x crop factor, and you won't be able to do digital stabilization with that mode. So stuff like that, it's important to check out if you're into video. 4K 17:9 or 16:9 from around 60 frames a second to 24 frames a second. You won't have a crop factor when you're not using digital stabilization. So that's not too bad. Other things to take note of with this camera, and actually some of the features of the previous camera, weather resistance is a very nice feature to have. Obviously it's just weather resistant, it's not waterproof, but you need to have that additional accessory that attaches to the lens, and then also have a filter on that to make it water resistant or weather resistant. Other accessories, you've got that wide angle lens and the teleconverter lens. It does have the built-in ND filter, so in video situations, photography situations, the maximum aperture of f2, that's going to be nice if it's really bright out and you want to use that larger aperture. Still using the old battery, considering that it's adding internal stabilization. Maybe the efficiencies of the new processor kind of cancel out some of that, but I wouldn't expect this camera to be amazing with frames per battery. One thing to take note of is that it still has the single card slot and it's still UHS 1. So I would assume there's going to be some limitations with video. One camera that was released somewhat recently, the Nikon ZF, was able to get around the small camera form factor, but it's a larger camera in general. It's a full frame camera, but they added a micro SD in addition to the standard SD card slot. So you still have 2 cards in that camera. I wish they would have done something like that with this camera, but it is smaller. So maybe there just wasn't any room to potentially add a micro SD card slot or something like that. If you don't know about this camera, it is a hybrid viewfinder design. So you've got your optical viewfinder, which is not in the same optical path as the sensor. In the optical viewfinder, if you're focusing up close, It's going to give you a box potentially to show you a shifted view of where it's going to be framing the final photo from the lens and sensor. It's a little quirky. I had used that with the X100F, and honestly, I ended up switching to the electronic viewfinder most of the time. It's a nice feature, it's cool, but it is a little bit gimmicky. If you really love optical viewfinders, even with the parallax considerations and stuff, your only option with this specialty type of setup. So it's cool that it exists. It does have the tilting screen. It just tilts vertically. It doesn't give you any type of side tilt if you want to do portraits or something. Considering how small of a camera it is, I think it's nice that it at the very least has some type of tilt screen. You do have a bit of tactile control with the mix of the ISO and also shutter speed with that single dial. It's a little quirky to use in practice. It looks basically the same as the X100F that I had. You have to pull up the outer ring to adjust the ISO, and in practice, I didn't enjoy doing that. The port situation is fine, but a little quirky as well. It uses a 2.5mm jack for the microphone and also cable release. One thing to take note of with all of the X100 series cameras, 1/4-20 tripod connector, that's not ideal in some situations if you're doing panoramas, things like that. It's a little awkward, but also with the battery, it's difficult to have some type of plate or something on the camera and then change the battery out or the memory card. Going to conventions, taking photos, having a camera like the X100 series is very convenient for the size of it, but I think it hits this point where it's still relatively large, but that means you can't really put it in a pocket, maybe a cargo pants pocket or something, a small bag, which is fine if you're okay with that. I think the other camera to consider, or at least compared to this, is the Ricoh GR series of camera. Those ones are smaller, they're sleeker, they have less buttons and such and features, but I think that's a good compromise to get the size down. That would be my main consideration, is Ricoh GR compared to this, if you are okay with still carrying a bag or whatever. That was one of my main considerations when selling the X100F that I had, is that it just wasn't small enough to make a big difference. What I use now is the Nikon Z5 with the 28mm f2.8 lens, full frame camera. I go to conventions, take photos of cosplayers walking around the convention. It's fun, it works. This camera obviously is larger. Considering the portability is small enough, you could probably fit it into a coat pocket. I guess that isn't a huge difference compared to the Ricoh GR series. It's going to really depend on if it fits size-wise for you and what specific situations. If you do street photography, at least in my case, I do the convention photography. Both of those cameras would work, but I tend to go with the Ricoh just based on the smaller size. But if you want more buttons, you want more dials, you want more features, obviously the Fujifilm is a nice option. But the price, so it's getting more expensive. We'll see if Ricoh raises their prices too. It's very possible. Yeah, I like this series of camera. I think it's good that it exists. It's cool that they're adding more and more features and functionality, but the price increases, so it's kind of a trade-off. Hopefully Fujifilm decides to make a cheaper version of this, takes out the optical viewfinder module thing, and potentially even takes out the back tilting screen, just tries to make it cheaper, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this opinion video on the X100 VI Scatter Photography Banzai. See ya.